74 bodies. That's how many terrorist corpses Nigerian soldiers physically recovered from the battlefield in Borno State from just 1 week of operations. Not reported, not missing, recovered. And here's what nobody is asking. While the Nigerian Army is running a drone war in the Sahel, neutralizing ISWAP commanders and coordinating airstrikes with a neighboring country, why does it feel like most Nigerians are hearing about this for the first time right now? The real question isn't whether the military is winning battles. The question is who benefits from keeping you in the dark about how far this war has actually evolved and what does it mean for Nigeria's future if it keeps being treated like a footnote. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, the picture looks very different from the headline. Before we go deeper, if you're just finding Nigerianewsfeed, welcome. This channel exists to break down what's really happening in Nigerian politics without the noise, without the spin. Hit subscribe and stay with me, because this one gets interesting. Let's lay the foundation. In the early hours of Wednesday, March 18, 2026, around 12:50 a.m., suspected Boko Haram ISWAP terrorists launched a coordinated assault on Mallam Fatori in Abadam local government area of Borno State. They advanced on foot from the Duguri axis, supported by armed drones, directly targeting the 68th Battalion's defensive position. This wasn't a random raid. The insurgents advanced in formation and deployed armed drones in what officials described as a desperate attempt to breach the military base. Think about that. Drones. This is no longer just men with AK-47s on motorcycles. ISWAP has evolved into a semi-conventional force using aerial assets. The attack was repelled following coordinated and overwhelming firepower from both ground troops and air components, with the synergy between air and land forces denying the terrorists freedom of movement and forcing a disorderly withdrawal toward the Arege general area. Then comes the part the headline barely mentioned. Additional support was provided by allied air components from the Niger Republic, which conducted strike operations against the fleeing insurgents. A country under a military junta that many Western governments have sanctioned is now conducting joint air operations with Nigeria. That alone deserves its own video. The wider operational update covering March 13 to 19 was delivered by Major General Michael Onoja, Director of Defense Media Operations. He confirmed that follow-up exploitation operations led to the recovery of 74 terrorist bodies and a cache of arms, including 38 AK-47 rifles, 3 PKT machine guns, and an RPG tube. But here's the trigger for why this matters today. This comes on the heels of a devastating terrorist strike. The attack followed a recent wave of violence by suspected Boko Haram militants that killed at least 23 people and injured more than 100 in Maiduguri, the capital of Borno State. Anadolu Ajansi. So, the army is winning battles, but civilians are still dying in the state capital. Hold that tension, because we're coming back to it. Now that you understand what happened, let's talk about the machinery behind it, and more importantly, where the cracks are. Operation Hadin Kai, which means collective effort in Hausa, is the Nigerian military's primary counter-insurgency operation in the northeast. It operates under the Defense Headquarters and the Joint Task Force Northeast, coordinating the Army, Air Force, and allied regional forces. Troops of Operation Hadin Kai repelled coordinated ISWAP attacks on forward operating bases across Borno State at Mayanti, Gajigana, and Gajiram, demonstrating the sustained pressure being applied across multiple fronts simultaneously. Now, constitutionally, internal security is a concurrent matter in Nigeria. The President, as Commander-in-Chief, authorizes military deployments under Section 217 of the 1999 Constitution, which mandates the armed forces to suppress insurrection and act in aid of civil authorities. The military can deploy troops at the President's discretion, no legislative approval required for ongoing domestic counterinsurgency. That creates a structural problem. There is minimal independent oversight of what happens in the theater. The Defense Headquarters briefs the public, but the briefings are curated. What we know comes primarily from the Director of Defense Media Operations, Major General Onoja, speaking to journalists in Abuja. The operational picture is whatever the military decides to release.
Here's a number that should stop you. Nigeria has been fighting Boko Haram since 2009, that is 17 years, and the military is still conducting daily firefights in the same local government areas, Abadam, Goza, Kondoga. The geography hasn't changed.
Here's where it gets interesting. The Tinubu administration inherited a security situation that, frankly, no Nigerian president has been able to resolve since Goodluck Jonathan declared a state of emergency in Borno in 2013. Every administration since has needed the Northeast conflict to serve a political function, not to be won but to be managed. Why? Because a fully pacified Northeast changes the political arithmetic dramatically. The security crisis gives the federal government leverage over governors in Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa. Emergency security funding flows through federal channels. Military presence in civilian life creates patronage networks. And a state of perpetual low-level war keeps certain questions about governance failures, about poverty, about the conditions that breed insurgency permanently off the table. In the same week that 74 terrorist bodies were recovered in Borno, a woman was intercepted in Kano with 884 rounds of live ammunition. A female ammunition courier was intercepted in Kano, highlighting ongoing efforts to dismantle logistics networks. Kano, not Borno. The supply chain for this war runs through Nigeria's commercial cities, and that means the conflict has political roots that military operations alone cannot sever. The silent players here are the local political and economic actors who benefit from insecurity, from emergency contracts to the illegal economic activities that thrive in ungoverned spaces. The military wins battles, but the system that replenishes the insurgency remains largely intact. Regionally, the Northeast remains the most underserved zone in Nigeria's federal allocation debates. The security crisis is both a consequence of that neglect and a reason why it continues, because stable governance in the region would demand fiscal and political accountability that powerful interests resist. Now, if what I just laid out surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know your take before we get to the part that changes the whole picture. Let's zoom out. This is not only a Borno story. Operations in the same week saw troops rescue 4 kidnapped victims in Katsina, foil the abduction of a cleric in Kaduna, and arrest suspected terrorists and ammunition couriers in Kwara, Plateau, and Nasarawa. The security picture in Nigeria in March 2026 is multi-front. It is not contained to the Northeast. The economic consequences are severe and chronically under-discussed. Agricultural land in Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa has been depopulated by conflict for over a decade. Internally displaced persons, numbering in the millions, place enormous strain on state and federal welfare systems. Food insecurity in the Northeast feeds directly into national inflation figures. When you complain about food prices in Lagos or Port Harcourt, the Borno conflict is part of the equation. On interfaith and inter-ethnic dynamics, ISWAP stated ideology targets both non-Muslims and Muslims who cooperate with the state. The majority of their victims are Muslims, farmers, traders, soldiers. Framing this conflict in religious terms plays directly into the insurgents' narrative. The accurate frame is criminal political, a violent organization fighting to control territory and resources. The security implication that concerns analysts most is the drone evolution. During the attack on FOB Gajiram in March 2026, terrorists armed with PKT guns, RPGs, and armed drones attacked the base, with one armed drone recovered among the items abandoned by fleeing fighters. ISWAP is not just using commercial drones for surveillance, they are weaponizing them. If that capability matures, the calculus for every military base in the Northeast changes. This section is not optional, because the international dimension here is genuinely significant. The Niger Republic angle is the most underreported element of this entire story.
Allied forces from the Niger Republic conducted rapid strike passes in support of the operation, compounding the pressure on fleeing insurgents. Here is the geopolitical complexity. Niger's current junta, which took power in a coup in July 2023, expelled French and American troops, tore up security agreements with the West, and moved closer to Russia. ECOWAS, led in part by Nigeria, threatened military intervention after the coup and ultimately backed down. Nigeria and Niger Republic have had a fraught relationship since then. And yet, operationally, their air assets are flying in joint operations against ISWAP over Nigerian territory. Because the threat is real, pragmatism is overriding diplomacy. This tells you something important. The security architecture in the Sahel is being rebuilt informally, outside formal ECOWAS or Western frameworks. Nigeria is navigating that without a clear public strategy, and that silence carries risk. For diaspora Nigerians, understand that what's happening in Borno has direct implications for Nigeria's positioning in global counter-terrorism partnerships, its ability to attract investment in the north, and the long-term viability of Tinubu's economic recovery agenda. You cannot have the economic growth story if the security story doesn't improve. Nigeria is simultaneously asking for debt relief from international creditors and conducting a drone war. The two are not unconnected. Security spending competes with social investment. Every naira spent on repelling a SWAP drone is a naira not spent on the conditions, poverty, unemployment, ungoverned spaces that made ISWAP possible in the first place.
Let's clear the air on what people are getting wrong. Misconception 1. The army is winning, this is almost over. Not quite. Nigeria has long struggled with attacks by armed groups, including Boko Haram and its offshoot ISWAP, in various parts of the country. Tactical victories, even large ones like this, do not resolve a structural insurgency. ISWAP has demonstrated the ability to absorb casualties, adapt tactics, and reconstitute. The strongest counter-argument is that sustained military pressure does degrade capability over time. That's true. But degrading ISWAP militarily without addressing the political economy of the Northeast is pushing water uphill. Misconception 2. This is a religious war. The framing serves the insurgents, not the analysis. ISWAP's primary victims are Muslims. Their fighters are recruited from communities abandoned by the Nigerian state. This is a governance failure dressed in ideological clothing. Misconception 3. The military's body counts prove the mission is working. Body counts have been notoriously unreliable metrics in counterinsurgency warfare worldwide, from Vietnam to Afghanistan. 74 bodies recovered is significant, but without independent verification and without visibility on civilian casualties or displacement caused by operations, the full picture remains incomplete. The strongest point the government can legitimately make is this: the military is more capable, better coordinated, and more technologically equipped than at any point in this conflict. That is probably true. The question is whether capability alone can close a political wound this deep. Here's what to watch for. Most likely next moves. ISWAP will attempt to reconstitute in the Arage-Lake Chad corridor, where the terrain provides cover. Expect another major attack attempt within 6 to 10 weeks, likely timed to coincide with a political or symbolic moment. The military will continue offensive operations to prevent regrouping. Signals of escalation. Watch for ISWAP drone attacks moving south toward Maiduguri itself or toward oil infrastructure. If drone incidents begin appearing outside the traditional Lake Chad theater, that is a major escalation signal. Also watch the ammunition supply chain. If interceptions like the Kano case become more frequent, it signals the logistics network is under stress but still active. Best case scenario.
Sustained military pressure, combined with a genuine state-level governance push in Borno, Zulum's administration has been notable in this regard, gradually shrinks the ungoverned space. International investment follows. The cycle begins to reverse. Worst-case scenario. ISWAP adapts its drone and IED capabilities faster than the military's countermeasures evolve. A successful strike on Maiduguri city, or worse, a southern city, triggers a political crisis, mass displacement, and investor flight that sets back the Tinubu economic agenda by years. Long-term impact if nothing structurally changes. Nigeria remains locked in a low-grade Sahel war indefinitely, managing it, never resolving it, spending political capital and national resources on a conflict that should have been closed a decade ago. At the start of this video, I asked you, who benefits from keeping you in the dark about how far this war has evolved? Here's the answer. The actors, political, economic, and institutional, who benefit from a managed crisis rather than a resolved one. The military wins battles, Nigeria loses time. 74 bodies recovered in 1 week. Armed drones intercepted. Joint operations with a post-coup junta in Niger. A female ammunition courier in Kano. This is not a footnote story. This is the story of what the Nigerian state is spending its energy and resources on while the economic clock ticks. The military deserves credit for battlefield performance. Nigerian soldiers are fighting hard and dying in those forests. But credit for tactical execution does not substitute for the strategic accountability that this conflict demands. What do you think? Is Nigeria closer to ending this insurgency, or are we in a permanent cycle? Drop your take in the comments. I read every one. If this breakdown gave you clarity on what's really going on, do me a favor, share it with one person who needs to understand this. Like the video, subscribe to Nigernewsfeed, and I'll see you in the next one.